Welcome to the third episode of my perimeter wall build for Legions Imperialis. This week I'll be finishing up the wall build, adding details to the backs of the walls, all of these little pipes and greeblies. That's probably the most fun. And then after that, we're going to start painting, which we'll get into that today. So yeah, let's get into it. At this point in the build, the battlements are almost completely done. There's only maybe a couple of these little end pieces of the Civitas walls that go along the top edge that I still need to glue into place. But a couple of those they still needed a little bit of cleaning up. They were maybe a little bit too long. So yeah, that's what I'm doing here. I'm just finishing up those last couple pieces. Now it's time to glue the plastic card onto the tops of the buildings. I think at this point I already had the other ones down there on the far end already glued in place. I still had to do these ones. Now that I had a fresh memory card in my camera, I was able to get at least that little spot recorded. I did finally get around to making a gate. It's still a work in progress, and I think I might actually do something different later on. At this point, I have the battlements completely done. They're all glued on, except for the weapon mounts and the weapons themselves. The weapons I've already built. Basically what I did was I took some extra weapons that I had for Warlord Titans, and I just slightly modified those so that I could mount them on top of these little buildings that I'd added, one to each wall. You'll notice, you can see here, there's a medium-sized building on the two inner walls, and then small-sized buildings on the two outer walls. My whole thought process on that was maybe they just get a little bit bigger as they get closer to the actual gate. For the weapon mounts, what I did was I took these extra bits from Dreadnought drop pods. Well, I guess they're actually for the Palisade drop pods, but that's what comes in the Dreadnought drop pod box for Legions Imperialis. Because you really only need 2 of those Palisades if you want to use I forget what it's called, but there's a formation that you can use from the new book for Legions Imperialis, which is pretty great. And so I already have those 2, and so I had all these extra bits from the drop pod box. And when I put them in here, I was like, wow, these they fit perfectly. It looks like the gun would be mounted on something like this. So, and really all I had to do was drill out a little hole in the middle and then just kind of carve around the edge of the inside so that the piece that I use to mount it would just slot right in. And then the piece that I use to mount the guns is actually I'm not entirely sure what this bit is. It looks like a wall lamp or something. I guess I can show it here on the side. Here you can see I cleaned off the back tables so that I could get it ready for the photo shoot. I used those photos for the thumbnails for the last 2 videos. I decided not to show that process here, even though I did get footage of it, simply because it wasn't really part of the actual build process. I'd also found a piece of 1/2-inch thick foam that was already actually cut to the size that I needed for my gate. And here I'm just gluing some extra bits onto it. All the pipes and generators, things like that from the Manufactorum kit. I had actually gone through and put together some pipe sections on my breaks in the office at work. So I had already used up all the pieces that I had, And at this point, all I could do is figure out, okay, which ones do I want to put on which walls, and then glue them into place. So yeah, this part ended up being probably the fastest and easiest because I'd already put all the pieces together at work, and now I just had to come home and glue them into place. I also ended up with a whole bunch of those little oil drums, so I thought, why not just put them all on one base in one spot and make a huge fuel dump? You can see here is that I've already cut the foam and glued it underneath the Civitas walls so that they have a little bit of a ledge underneath them. I think what happened there was either my camera had died or my memory card ran out of memory. I'm not sure which, but ultimately I didn't get footage of the process of cutting that foam before having glued it on. I went ahead and primed all the weapons black, and that's just using some regular primer from my local hardware store. And now I'm getting everything ready so I can coat everything in a layer of just plain white house paint. And hopefully it'll be enough that when I spray it with the gray primer from a rattle can, hopefully it won't damage the foam. But if it does end up damaging the foam, I don't think it'll be that big of a deal. I think probably I can use some of that damage to my advantage, and maybe it'll look like wall has actually been kind of worn down in that area, or even look like battle damage of some kind. This was a pretty long and tedious process, brushing on all of the house paint by hand. Yeah, so as I was brushing on the house paint, I noticed that I'd forgotten to texture some of the foam that I'd just put on there. So in the middle of it, I had to stop, get my little foil ball, and add texture to that little bottom ledge there. And then it was back to painting. I also, at this point, I didn't bother painting the tops, like the rooftops, since that's all plastic and plastic hard. I don't really think I'll have a problem with the primer going through that. And if it does, the foam underneath, it's not really going to damage. I really just need to make sure that all the wall facings are covered so that those parts don't get damaged when I do hit it with a spray can. Ready for some gray primer. Next week we'll get into that. I'm not entirely sure how far we'll get into the painting, but I'll try to move it along as fast as I can. I'll see you next week. Cheers.